Welcome to the IWP Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Robbins, Dean of Academics at the Institute of World Politics. For over 30 years, IWP has been the private, independent, accredited graduate school of national security, intelligence, and international affairs in Washington, D.C., offering master's degrees, doctorates, and specialized certificate programs. You can learn more about IWP at our website, iwp.edu. Today, we have a very special guest joining us, Elina Beketova. Elina is a distinguished fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, where she has made significant contributions through her insightful articles on critical issues affecting Ukraine and Eastern Europe. Elina was born and raised in Crimea, then lived and studied in North Carolina and Mississippi. She worked as a journalist, an editor, and TV anchor in Kharkiv and Kyiv. Now she is working in the United States with CEPA and shedding light on the intricate and often alarming strategies employed by Russia in its ongoing conflict with Ukraine. Elina, welcome to the IWP Podcast.
Thank you so much, Dr. Robbins, for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here at the Institute of World Politics.
Thank you. This year marks 10 years since Russia illegally occupied Crimea. Tell us what it was like when you were growing up in free Crimea, and then what happened afterwards.
Thank you so much for this wonderful question and for bringing back the topic of Crimea, the illegally annexed peninsula. It's interesting because when I was born and raised there, I didn't know what would happen afterwards. And right now I have a lot of complaints in terms of and regrets because I can go back there and I haven't seen a lot of places there. And I, sometimes meet here people who were in places where I've never been. And that's like my, native peninsula, but I've never been there. So it means that we have to value things that we have because sometimes we can lose them or we won't be able to have an opportunity to go there. But when I was born and raised there, it's a wonderful place because we had a lot of people from all over the world, and that's a wonderful, just beautiful peninsula where it is wonderful to be born because we had a beach, we had a Black Sea, I had my friends over there, and now everyone is in different spots of the planet. And we had, it's a very good question because I had a Peace Corps volunteer English teacher when I was, 14 or 13, and she was teaching us English. That is why I basically learned how to speak English.
When did you leave Crimea?
So I left Crimea when I was in 2006. I applied for a fellowship, for a transatlantic fellowship in Wake Forest University, and that was Benjamin Franklin Transatlantic Fellowship. That we just did a lot of things in terms of leadership, how to use social media and all of that. It was a very interesting experience for me because I was 16 years old, and that was the first place which I saw after the small peninsula, the United States and Wake Forest University, and everything was so different, and I was just carried away and fascinated by how you have different systems, different cultures, and everything coexist together. And then I came back to Ukraine and entered the university, and it was 2006, and I went to live in Kharkiv, which is the eastern part of Ukraine.
Did you go back to Crimea?
I did, yeah, of course. I was studying in the university, and then I would visit my parents. It's a lot of fun because this small peninsula was overcrowded all the time during the summer, and right now I know it's not the case anymore because the peninsula is like a black box and people cannot go there anymore, so it feels like it's a very empty place right now. If I compare it with my student years, whenever a lot of students would just take a train ticket and go to the peninsula and spend a lot of time there, they were like, there was no space, no free space on the beach because there were a lot of people around you. But right now I saw a few videos and I understand that it's not that case anymore. So you have a lot of free space right now in Crimea because people don't go there.
Oh, for good reason. What were your experiences or the experiences of your family in 2014 when Russia illegally occupied Crimea?
Yeah. That was unfortunately not only my situation, but millions of people from Crimea experienced the same. So like once in a moment, you just couldn't go there back, and it was very strange realizing that the land where you're from is illegally annexed or occupied, and you could see different flags, you could hear different language there, and that's like an attack on your identity. But when you were there, of course, you couldn't understand that that was like an attack on identity, because it's just kind of you couldn't process it in your brain that it can happen in the 21st century, that the land where you're from suddenly turns into something else. And you can't control it, you can't influence anything there. Like you feel this feeling of helplessness all the time because you can't change it. And that's the most frustrating part of it, is that when the legal annexation happened, a lot of people come across with the feeling of absolute helplessness, because the things that you think are not normal and that the whole world will do something about it right now, because you simply cannot deal with this power for obvious reasons, right? And you feel then that no, nothing happens. And that's the most frustrating feeling that I had and a lot of families went through.
For those who have been left behind, you've written about how Russia essentially brainwashes teenagers in occupied areas, not just Crimea, but all the occupied areas of Ukraine. Could you elaborate on some of the tactics that they use to influence the youth under Russian control?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for asking this question. It's just I think that that's the same playbook that Russian forces have for every land that they occupy. So they basically close the territory, and then it's not possible not only to access it, but to get anything from there. And people live in a parallel reality, and they are given absolutely distorted point of view. So you can't just, like, if you live in the temporarily occupied territory, this is the term that the Ukrainian government uses for all the illegally annexed or occupied territories by Russia right now. So you can't verify any information on the free land. So if you want to just enter some other website or read it anywhere else, you're simply banned. So how are you going to know what is going on in the world if you are banned to log in this website and read the information about that? So the only way that you can get your information is through the Telegram channels, which there are like a lot of Telegram channels, or through the state propaganda media machine that exists in Russia. So that is why people are given a lot of information that distorts the reality, and they don't have an opportunity to check it out anywhere unless they have relatives in the free land somewhere. But then we have an issue, do people want to check this information? Do they want to speak with their relatives living in the Ukraine-controlled territory? Because that's a very sensitive issue. A lot of families just are divided right now. They don't have an opportunity to speak with each other anymore, because people who have been brainwashed for many, many years, they don't believe those who live on the Ukraine-controlled territory. And people in Ukraine-controlled territory know that people live in black boxes there in temporarily occupied territories. But we live in the free world, and we know it because we can check any information. And those people who stay there, they unfortunately can't do it. So what Russian forces are doing, would you like to talk about the teenagers, like the programs? They are trying to basically control the future generation, and they are trying to control the younger population because they understand that they need to militarize them. And they use all type, like they have the propaganda machine for everyone, for like adults, like people who just would turn on the television set, right? Or for teenagers. And there are different programs because I checked it out. I wrote about it. Like Russia wanted to allocate for the patriotic education of citizens of the Russian Federation 470 million of US dollars for 2024. That's a lot of money, and this is what they are pouring into this so-called patriotic education of citizens of the Russian Federation, which they also include these temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories. So, what they do, they have different mobile cultural centers. So they deploy mobile cultural centers equipped with modern technology and stages to disseminate propaganda materials. So, for instance, it's a very small settlement which doesn't have, maybe it doesn't have the TV set, or people don't have a TV set. So they would give you this mobile platform which will show you the screen with the state propaganda network or channel. This is what they're going to be doing. I think that it existed somewhere in the Soviet Union. Then they have expansion of youth clubs and recruitment. They have different clubs where they promote the Russian agenda among young people. These clubs aim to integrate youth into the Russian world and groom them to align with Russian interests. Then they involve teenagers from occupied territories to different events that happen in Russia. And they are trying to show them that they are allegedly the part of the Russian Federation. So if a person is 14, 15, 16 years old, during this year, his psyche is very flexible. So a person may believe that they are the part of the Russian Federation. Then they have all the type of military patriotic education. They have Unarmia and the Young Guard of the United Russia. That's their party. They basically spread all this military patriotic education to young people and encourage them to serve in the armed forces of Russia. Then they have different things like summer camps, exchange programs, mentorship initiatives for those kids from the temporarily occupied territories. And you would ask, why do people agree to take part in it? But if you live on the frontline territory and you don't have other means, and sometimes parents are busy with it, and they are offering you, that's a wonderful club with military education. Why don't you want to go there? They will take care of you. And they have all type of activities, like let's go and plant trees together. And then they will spread their propaganda messaging over there, like you are the part of the Russian Federation, let's do it together. And all type of messages, you name it. You know, I wouldn't spend a lot of time on it because they spend a lot of time on it. But I definitely write about it, but it's just they are super creative. That's what you have to understand, and I'm sure you know about that. I just sometimes when I read about it, and I don't know why I torture myself and why I punish myself with all of that, but I just want to spread the word so that we all know what it means, that it will have consequences. If Ukrainians won't have enough of weapons to liberate those territories, it will mean that we will have a lot of population living on these territories who are brainwashed. And according to the Ukrainian Center Almeda, more than 1 in 6 million children live in the temporarily occupied territories. At least 100,000 of them are involved in Russian propaganda youth organizations, like Unarmia and Movement of the First. So imagine the numbers. And this is what we assume. It might be even more. Dr. Robbins, I'm very concerned about this topic, and maybe I'm sure what are the methods how we can work with those kids and teenagers, because I understand that in this case, Russian Federation are trying to control the future. Are there any ways how we can combat it?
Well, it's very clear that you're passionate about this topic, and that Russia is very serious in terms of taking Ukrainians and turning them into Russians, or at least to the extent that they can. So that's the downside of it. That's just the negative side, the totalitarian side of what Russia is doing to control the society. But not everybody is going along with it. And we hear very little about the resistance to Russia in the occupied zone. But you have covered some incredible acts of defiance against Moscow and its agenda. So could you share some of the most significant resistance efforts that you've reported?
Well, thank you so much for this question. I think that so it's interesting because sometimes I'm asked what helped Ukraine to withstand this Russian army, this massive Russian army, this Russian force that is bigger than the Ukrainian army. And I say that in the majority of cases it was the defense forces of Ukraine, their readiness, and in some cases it was just ordinary people who wanted to resist and who wanted to help the Ukrainian armed forces. And resistance movement exists in several ways. So it's just the partisan movement. Basically, people, they are working in non-violent ways. So it means that they just get some information, or they can, like there was a story with a granny who lived in one settlement and it was occupied, and she would be transmitting the information about the Russian forces and mining of the territory. And then she was like, okay, I need to go to see my friend in another settlement. And Ukrainians told her, how are you going to go there? Like the whole road is mined. And she was like, well, I saw them mining it from my house, from the window. So I know exactly where they mined everything. So I know how to get to another settlement to my friend. And she's she's a senior, you know. And then she went and she returned in 4 days, and then she transmitted some information from another settlement. So we had stories like that, and then we had stories of just young population who didn't want to become the Russian world. So that is why we have yellow movement, yellow ribbon movement. It's also non-violent movement. They basically have blue and yellow stripes, and they can hang it in public places. It means that they're waiting for the for the Ukrainian government to take control of this territory, or for Ukrainians to come back. Then we have like a lot of cases. You would be surprised that I believe in Crimea they banned basically Ukrainian songs, so it's not possible to play them anywhere in public places. And there were a couple of weddings where people wanted to play the Ukrainian songs, you know. And for that, someone was detained, someone was given a fine, and it's just wild that it's happening in the 21st century. Not only tortures, you know, killings of Ukrainians and exterminations, but like such things as people cannot stay Ukrainians in the temporarily occupied territories. So they can't learn the Ukrainian language, they cannot read their, read the news. So sometimes I was told that even subscription to Ukrainian websites or news on your Telegram channel might be a reason for your detention in the filtration center. Filtration center is like a checkpoint where Russians were checking people. And if they saw a tattoo on your body, which is a patriotic sign, or if they saw that you are subscribed to some Ukrainian website, then they could detain you. Just for that, imagine. And of course, obviously, if someone had people serving in the Ukrainian army, that was also the reason for detention.
Presumably, the Russian security services are very strict at watching people and very clever about the ways that they have been infiltrating societies, subverting people, building agent networks, and so forth to try to detect people who may not be going along with what Moscow is trying to do.
Yeah, there was one of their technique that they call a man on the street. So there is a line somewhere to the shop, and then someone in the line starts talking, oh, these Russians, they're doing that and that, they are so bastards, why did they come here? And they just observe who is agreeing with them and who like basically supports this idea. And then this person might be easily detained just for the reason he was agreeing allegedly to this spy in the line who was like talking bad things about Russian forces. That's something we should probably know. I'm sure all the defense and military experts, we can't underestimate the enemy, right? But they are super creative in all the terms of subversive work and everything. But turning back to your question about the movement, we have the Ateš movement, which is considered to be a violent movement in Crimea, because they basically infiltrated the ranks of the Russian army and they work from there. So they know they knew in the beginning of the full-scale invasion that Russians are going to conscript people from the temporarily occupied territories. That is why people in Crimea decided to voluntarily join the ranks of the Russian army and to know what they are going to do afterwards. It's not obvious what's the number of this movement right now, but I was told around 1,800 people worked there, and that was informants, agents, and all of them, and activists who would be just transmitting information, or those people who were not afraid to actually do something. And according to Ateš, I spoke with the person who gave me his name, Johar, but definitely he's not Johar, that's just his nickname. And he said that one of their cases is that because of them, they played a crucial role in significant Ukrainian operations against the Russian fleet in Crimea. This includes successful strikes on the landing ship Minsk and the submarine Rostov-on-Don, as well as an attack on the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet. And when I asked him, do you have a person, or how do you work with those people? And he said that they have 3 levels of security over there. He won't tell it to me, but it's interesting. He said that a lot of Russians are trying to get this information, and they're trying to join the ranks of this partisan movement to know their structure like that. And he said they detained 3 people who tried to join them, but they were not sincere. They were like Russians, just trying to get their structure and information. But they had a lot of different stories. It's just we won't probably have time to learn about all the movements in Ukraine, but they exist.
Yes, I can guess that the counterintelligence struggle is very strong on both sides, both in Ukraine and the Russian side. It's interesting, your story about the people who will say things in public against Russia. I know that in World War II, Smersh in the Soviet army would send out people to tell jokes about Stalin just to see who would laugh. Provokacja, to see, is there anyone's going to, and so of course the troops wouldn't do anything, because if you laughed or if you denounce, you can't denounce the joke teller because he probably works for the Soviet intelligence.
Interesting. So basically they use the same tactics, but it's many years ago. We have the war, and it's so many years passed away since that moment, but they still use the same.
Oh, it's exactly the same. The filtration centers, the way that they reintegrated Ukraine after World War II, all of that is identical to what you're just describing. It's just interesting that the pattern is the same.
Preserves, yeah. But we have the National, by the way, Resistance Center. That's the body that works within the Ukrainian army. It's the detachment, one of the detachment of the Ukrainian army, special forces, and they coordinate the work of different partisan movements. But I had a talk with the representative of the National Resistance Center, and his quote just struck me, because he basically said, Russians are surprised because they think that we have a coordination headquarters. But the interesting part with Ukrainians is that we don't have it anymore, because when the full-scale invasion started, probably there was some existence of this coordination, because we had a Telegram channel where you could inform where you saw the Russian tank, and that was you could transmit this information, and it was publicly it was known. But he said that afterwards, Ukrainians don't have any coordination right now, and Russians can't get it, because they think that there is this decision-making center, and someone sits there and coordinates the work of all the partisans. But they told that, no, we don't have it. People do because they feel that they need to do it, because they want to liberate their land. They don't want to live in the occupation. They don't want to be the part of the authoritarian state, of the authoritarian society. They want to be free.
That's excellent. Elina, you wrote a piece about post-liberation Crimea, which is an optimistic idea, so well done. And you discuss potential strategies for reintegration of the society back to Ukraine. Mm-hmm. What are the most critical steps that Ukraine and the international community could take now and in the future to ensure that smooth transition?
Thank you so much, Dr. Robbins, for this wonderful question, because I feel that Crimean issue is not always raised somewhere because a lot of people are simply afraid. What will happen if Ukraine liberates Crimea? Whether like this is a red line, so-called red line or whatever. But when we look into the thing and deeper, right? Crimea was illegally annexed, and that was the violation of all the norms, principles, of everything, of all the international law. So if the world lets the bigger country seize another country and stole another territory by force, then we live in a very dangerous world. And I would like the world to kind of regain this power of law and the principle, because right now what we see it's definitely not okay. But coming back to the question, the most difficult question is definitely we're not talking about territories. We're talking about people who have been living on this territory for, let's say right now it's 10 years. They've been occupied, and they definitely have to survive in that conditions, in that circumstances where they live right now. It doesn't make them, for instance, less Ukrainian, but it makes them definitely going through an experience that other Ukrainians don't go in other Ukraine-controlled territories, right? So that is why we always have to keep it in mind. And that is why I think that Ukraine is having a smart strategy, because they have a strategy for the occupation of Crimea, and the first one was adopted in March 2021 with 97 different steps toward the Free Peninsula, and in April 2023 this plan was kind of renewed and updated. Basically, it says that it will be given some time for people to, there is a strategy of cognitive deoccupation of Crimea, which says that there will be some moment of people understanding that they will have to switch to Ukrainian language, they will need to get it back, right? Because a lot of people lived, and they lived just with Russian language over there. Plus, it's public services when Ukraine regains control. So it's interesting because at the beginning of 2014, there were more than 60,000 civil servants in Crimea, and so these public servants are being prepared right now in schools in Ukraine, because definitely Ukraine won't need so much in the beginning. But when Ukraine regains control, there should be public servants who will be working there. And Ukrainians are taking a lead on that, because we have a few universities who basically prepare people for reintegration of temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories. There was a few questions on collaborators, because it's a very sensitive question. People live there for some time. They must have or could have collaborated with Russian forces. So how to distinguish who can have the job afterwards, who can't? And I know that a lot of discussions are still ongoing in Ukraine, and basically a very simple explanation is that middle and lower ranking civil servants whose actions had serious consequences will be held accountable and prosecuted. Those whose actions didn't have serious consequences will no longer be able to work in the public service. So it means we like it's right now it's very hard to understand who was doing what, but if a person worked in a court and that was a judge who detained a lot of, adopted a lot of illegal verdicts on Ukrainians and put them in the jail or something, can this person be a judge afterwards? That's a good question. Probably not. But if this person was a math teacher, and this person has been a math teacher for all his or her life, then probably he can proceed working as a math teacher. History teacher, that's a good question. We don't know what happened there, right, and who worked and who gave what type of information. But Ukrainians say that they have a plan for that. It's just a lot of discussions are still ongoing. I know that this discussion on teachers is still ongoing. Like they basically try to distinguish who is gonna, who did what. And according to that, afterwards, it will be possible to understand. But I know it may sound maybe naive right now, but Ukrainians do have a plan for that. So there are people who work on it on everyday basis, because there is a mission that works, there is a Crimean platform, and they work on it every day because they simply want to go back to their land where they are from, and they want to serve those people, and they want to try to reintegrate. And we're not talking about territories, we're talking about people who live there all these 10 years. And we personally, when we have a conversation with people from Crimea who know Crimea, we're like, look, the main thing is to give these people an opportunity to continue their life. If they didn't do anything bad, if they didn't work, collaborate, or they didn't take important decisions in Russian-controlled administrations, they will be leaving and they will be okay, because Ukrainians will regain control and everything will be as gradually. They will have some from 2 to 5 years, I think, they might have a new Ukrainian language, because right now, well, obviously, people didn't have it, so they don't speak Ukrainian language. But if it is a state language, they will have to gradually learn it. And it means that it's always this thought that Ukraine will give this time to those people who live there, because they simply had another experience. They lived through things that the free Ukraine didn't live through. And right now we are talking about not only Crimea, but we have in other territories, Zaporizhia, Kherson Oblast. There are Ukrainian territories that were occupied, and Lugansk, Donetsk, and there are like 5 regions right now. So we're talking about those people who live there right now, who have consequences of living under occupation. And people who have lived through this experience, they know what it means, because the main thing is to survive there. So like if you want to oppose to everything to the Russian regime, then you're detained, put to the prison, and that's it. If you wanted to live and survive, you did something there, right? Maybe you had a business, maybe you worked as a teacher, maybe you worked as a doctor. Well, you definitely did something, but it doesn't mean that if Ukraine regains control that it will put to the in jail all the people there. Of course, it's not true, and that's not the purpose of what Ukrainians are trying to do. They try to restore this land, and they try to restore the world order, and then they will have a plan how to work with those people, because the main thing is to regain control, not of the territory, but to win the hearts of those people who have been living under occupation.
Yes. Well, again, it's very optimistic to plan for that, but it should be planned for. And I think from the international point of view, the important thing is not to recognize officially, not to recognize this as a legitimate occupation, since it isn't. Throughout the Cold War period, the United States never recognized the Soviet Union's annexation of the Baltic states, for example, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, was never recognized by the United States. Those were always recognized as independent countries.
Yeah.
And it's important for the United States and other countries not to legitimize, not to recognize this illegal annexation or the other ones that Russia has done or planned.
Yeah. Dr. Robbins, if I may ask you, so that's a very optimistic scenario, right? And Ukrainians have a plan for that. But we all understand that Ukrainians right now are struggling a lot because they are not given what they need to win. Why is it so? Like you even told it in your article, why not give the Ukrainians the tools they need to win? The usual one-word answer is escalation. Why does this word still exist?
Why does the word escalation still exist? Well, because
in terms with Russia.
In terms with Russia, because nuclear weapons still exist. And Vladimir Putin goes out of his way to remind the world that Russia is a nuclear power, that they have these weapons, that he has his red lines, that he appears willing to use nuclear weapons if those red lines are crossed. And the United States is very conscious of this. Nobody wants to have a nuclear conflict at any level, whether it's tactical or, God forbid, a strategic level nuclear conflict. And so that's 100% the reason. If nuclear weapons did not exist, the United States could take a variety of measures to intervene in this conflict. And, particularly through air power, I think that would be decisive, in fact, in this conflict. If the United States was able to use air power to completely overwhelm Russian forces, that it wouldn't even be a question. But because of the realities of nuclear weapons and delivery systems that could reach the United States or reach anywhere, really, Kyiv is right there. Other cities in Ukraine, cities in Europe, anywhere. Because of this, the options to the United States and the international community are limited in terms of what they can do. If we reach Vladimir Putin's red line, the question is he crazy enough to do it? And I think so far most people think that he is crazy enough in his way to use nuclear weapons if he felt that somehow he was under threat, either personally or Russian sovereignty. And so that's 100% the answer.
Thank you so much for the answer. But then we are in the situation, all democracies, right, that we are reactive to what Putin and Russia or any other authoritarian threat might be doing. We are not proactive. Then we are not giving any response. And then Putin calibrates it and he is like, okay, I can go further. How to deal with that? Are there any mechanisms that are still working, that are effective, that we can use? And I mean the democracies.
That's true. And I think that the United States and other countries that are concerned about this issue should not be purely in a reactive mode, but should use all the elements of national power that they can to try to figure out a way to stop and push back on what Russia's doing. Various things have been implemented, whether it's sanctions, which have not been very effective, whether it's military assistance, which has been limited not only in terms of quantity and in type, but in usage, as we've seen throughout this, for example, where the United States said, don't use weapons in certain ways, don't target certain things in Russia, and so forth, these limited warfare approaches. Our diplomacy has been limited in that the United States and other countries have not really been pushing out towards having a dialogue for a just resolution to this conflict, which of course would involve Russia withdrawing from the temporarily occupied zones. And there's really no excuse for all that. The United States and other countries, NATO countries, that are concerned with this, should be pursuing this integrated full spectrum strategy towards this, amping it up in every way, military, diplomatic, economic, intelligence, you name it. Why the United States doesn't do that, I can't really say. Certainly, the current United States leadership rhetorically seems very fierce about this. Like they seem to like to say that they're pushing back against Putin, that they're this cannot stand and things like that. But then the follow through, the actions of the current administration just don't seem to comport with that. They can't seem to get it done. Lack of leadership, lack of vision. I'm not exactly sure why. Fear of nuclear escalation. It could be something like that. Well, all that means is that Russia has successfully deterred us, that we are no longer deterring Russia, but they are deterring us. Well, that's the wrong equation. We would much rather deter them. We don't seem to have a formula for that right now because Russia's doing a lot of things that we don't approve of, but they do it anyway. So that shows that our deterrent is no longer sufficient, that they're the ones with the deterrent, and we have to flip that.
And hopefully this formula will be found and created.
Well, yes, we would hope. I don't know, hope isn't really a method. It's not too difficult. I think that if the current administration took a stronger line, showed a little more backbone, a little more creativity in addressing these things, that they would actually get done. But again, you have to have people in a leadership position who are actually willing to show leadership. I'm not sure that there's an easy solution to that. I don't know who the better leaders would be, but we can still propose a policy solution to this or a strategy that would be better and hope that someone in a position of responsibility would say, yes, that's what we want to do. Well, let me ask you another question about the information domain. And you touched on this earlier, talking about what Russia's doing. They've been very active in spreading misinformation and propaganda and trying to portray what's going on through their lens. What are some of the trends that you've observed, and what can be done to counteract this type of political warfare?
Well, thank you so much for this question. As Dr. Robbins and you have said, they're super creative in terms of propaganda machine, disinformation campaigns everywhere, not only in temporarily occupied territories, elsewhere in Europe. We all saw what they're doing, and in the United States. So one of their campaigns that I'm seeing right now, that Ukrainians allegedly don't have people to fight, and that the centers who are mobilizing people are doing a lot of harm to Ukrainians. They want to turn them into the cannon fodder. So this is one of the their disinformation campaigns that they're spreading everywhere. And I just decided, I know that it's not true, because I know people who are serving in the military. We all have friends who are in the military or who are mobilized, conscripted, and people said that they wanted to do that, and that they still have their peers, brothers in arms who are fighting together with them. It's just unfortunate. Of course, Ukraine has lost a lot of people because of the war, and we are losing the best people right now. People who know who had the combat experience before, because they were trying to liberate even Mariupol when it was occupied. There was an attempt of occupation, and I spoke with the recruitment center in Kiev of the 3rd Assault Brigade. That's the AX. It's one of the brigades in Ukraine, and they have a very successful recruitment campaign, because they basically ask a person who she or he wants to do. And in these terms, they are trying to place him in the brigade or on the front line, where he or she will have the opportunity to serve. Because if a person doesn't want to, if a person is really good in IT and in, suppression of signals and everything, IT geek, why would you send him somewhere as an infantry? Because he or she will be just killed there. So there is why they are trying to have this more or less human approach to a person, and that is why they have 900 people right now a month who want to join them. And I spoke with another person who is just my colleague. We used to work as television anchors, and then he joined the Ukrainian army. He joined it as a part of the territorial defense forces. So territorial defense forces is like volunteer brigades that were formed after the full-scale invasion. People just wanted to serve. They just wanted to be volunteers. They didn't have any combat experience before, but they wanted to serve. And he told me that basically right now the situation is that we will have to change the recruitment campaign, because all the brigades will have to more or less have this approach, what the person wants to do. But we of course understand there are needs of the army. There are, there should be a lot of people as infantrymen, right, working and going there. But the main thing is that if Ukraine will be given enough of means, as you have said, and if Ukraine is given enough of weapons, then it will be easier to recruit people, it will be easier to mobilize people, because people will be understanding that they will have equipment to fight with. Because if you are kind of without shells and armored vehicles or something like that, then it's not a very fun task to defend your country, right? Because people don't want to be just cannon fodder, and that is why I hope that Ukraine will have the constant supply of weapons, and then Russia will be just exhausted, because they are really good, as you have written in your articles, they are good in attrition wars. And
Right.
Can we do something about it right now so that it's not a war of attrition in Ukraine? How can we change it?
Right. An attrition war is not good for Ukraine, since Russia has a much deeper mobilization base. Putin doesn't care how many people get killed. Whatever the difference in the casualty rates are, it doesn't matter to Russia. He can empty his prisons, he can round up people on the streets, throw them at the front, human wave attacks. He just doesn't care. Whereas Ukraine does care. You don't want to just bleed your country in order to maintain your independence. There has to be a better way to do it. And so I guess the question is, maybe your views. I know that you're not a military expert, but in terms of breaking the stalemate, because the stalemate is what's causing the political problem in the West and elsewhere of people who are saying, we're giving all this aid, we're giving, whatever it is, billions of dollars, and nothing's happening. The front line isn't moving. It's just kind of, there are little changes here, little changes there. And this can't last forever. Ukraine can't just sacrifice generations of its young people to the struggle. On the Russian side, again, they don't care. What is going to change that, where something dramatic will happen that will allow for a more political approach to a solution to this?
That's a great question. I wish I knew the answer on it, but the only thing, like military or defense experts who are on the front line, they just say that more or less that's the existential battle, so everyone will be fighting. So that's the sentiment right now, that's the vibe, and I speak with a lot of friends who might be having civilian jobs right now, but they understand they don't know whether there might be a day when they will be mobilized or conscripted, just because this is what we all have to do if we want to preserve ourselves as a nation. So we haven't chosen this war. Ukrainians haven't chosen this war, but they have to fight. So unfortunately, I think if Ukraine has a stalemate, then we're not in a very favorable position, because Russia, as you said, can do it for many, many years, and we see that they are ramping up their military production, and it doesn't cost them much. People living in Vladivostok or somewhere else still have the same lives, but Ukrainians and Europeans and other countries in Europe are struggling a lot, right? But it means that we are doing not enough, because we had successes of the Ukrainian army, because they liberated Kharkiv, Kherson Oblast, when no one expected it from them. So because of that, they were proactive, because everyone, that was like the traumatic experience for everyone. A lot of people died, a lot of people were injured, but that what is possible to do. So they liberated that lands, and they kind of returned the trust into the just armed forces of Ukraine are able to do it. And you remember everything what it was in 2022. So it means that when there is this surprise moment and enough of everything, then Ukrainians are able to do it. When Ukrainians are not given means, but they are everyone waits that they can liberate, then how are they going to do it? Why do we think that if they don't have enough of means, then there is no stalemate? There will be a stalemate. But I hope that maybe F-16s, maybe they might change some situation, but I was told by a lot of generals that, Elina, the real game changer are people. You have to preserve people, you have to have people, and you have to have motivated people. I know that we do have motivated people. Ukraine has a lot of folks who want to defend the country, but it's just the main thing for all the offensive operations. We need to have more, because right now we're talking about defending the territory that I write, because Russians are going to terrorize Ukrainians for many, many years. If we want it to happen, then it will be happening, because they're not going to stop. So why do we think that if we kind of chill just on the side, Ukrainians will do it by themselves? They are basically defending the whole European security right now, the eastern flank of NATO, because it's Ukrainians who are fighting. So if Ukraine fails, then there will be other countries who will be fighting. And
Yes, extremely difficult to win a purely defensive war. So finally, what would you like to see from the international community to support Kyiv and bring about this progress and bring about a just resolution of this conflict? What do you think is the most important thing?
That's a very tough question, Dr. Robbins. I see everything we all understand that a lot of countries will be busy right now with their election processes, and we don't know what will happen. And Ukrainians are still, they have to fight at this time. And we know how Russia uses all the hesitation moments, I call them like that, because whenever they feel that the United States or other European countries won't deal with it because they are weak, this is the moment when they attack. So it's a very vulnerable time for all the democracies right now during all the internal political processes like elections. So that is why we all have to be careful and watch out. But there is no answer to that. Like, I don't know what the international community should be doing right now. I think that Ukraine should be given enough of weapons and anti-missile systems to defend critical infrastructure ahead of autumn or winter season, because we need to have a lot of people staying in the places. We need to have economy that is working, because Ukrainians want to become self-sufficient, of course. We need to have domestic production of military, and we have to have underground factories, all of that. And this country should become like a fortress, and then it's possible to probably go with the offensive operations. But at this point, we have to preserve what is there right now, what Ukraine controls. So, and I don't see the understanding of this urgency of the moment. Sometimes I think that the whole world is just observing it as a game, who is gonna win? But we're talking about millions of lives at this particular moment who just sacrificed everything, who might have lost everything, but this is what they are doing right now. And I believe that we need to bring back this urgency moment, that it's urgent right now. We need it right now. Ukrainians need it right now because tomorrow might be simply late.
Fantastic. Well, as Winston Churchill said, give us the tools and let us finish the job.
He's so great. See, he was so great. Yeah.
Well, Elina, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing your important insights on what's going on in Ukraine. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Robbins, for having me over here, and I hope that's not the last time.
I'm sure you'll be back. You've been listening to the IWP Podcast. I want to thank our guest, Elina Beketova, for making time to talk to us today. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. If you liked our podcast, then please subscribe, share, and rate it, and spread the word. From Washington, for IWP, I'm Jim Robbins. Join us next time for another edition of the IWP Podcast.